Hey everybody, and welcome to a slightly different episode of The Script Department. Today, Brad and I are sitting down to watch Game of Thrones House of the Dragon, but we're doing it in a slightly different way. We know that this is kind of a new thing knocking around, so we're going to do a spoiler-free review for you guys to begin with, just to hammer out some general themes and ideas, and then we'll get into the main conversation. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can check out the rest of the chat over on Spotify, Apple, Audible, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're listening already, well, then just stay tuned and it'll all start happening for you very shortly. Don't forget, you can check us out all over the place. If you follow us on Instagram and on TikTok, you can get some very, very special portrait content from us there. And don't forget to check us out at thescriptdepartment.net for what our global network of screenwriters are up to. So that to one side. Brad, no spoilers now. Be good, please. What do you think, broadly
It feels like
speaking,
an
of
exam.
this? It is an exam. It's exactly
It feels
an
like an
exam. You
exam.
have to
Like,
be,
no spoilers,
yeah.
please.
What do you think? Broad strokes, what do you think of this series?
So I really enjoyed it. I was a big fan of Game of Thrones. Not from immediately. I think it was the third season I started binging it, and then I was like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I have to catch up. And then I made a
Yeah.
point of not reading ahead. I've been burnt before with graphic novels or novels that have been
Sure.
turned into TV shows, and I'm like, just from that one little thing, I know that they're not going to die, or they are going to die, or whatever it is. So I made a point of not reading forward. So I really enjoyed the last few seasons of Thrones. The final, yeah, good bits and bad
Yeah,
bits.
yeah.
So I was hoping for a bit of a comeback with this one, and I enjoyed it. Like, there were bits of it where it felt like it was going to let us down, and then you were like, oh, it's okay. I see what they've done there, and I
Yeah.
enjoyed it. It was nice to see Westeros again and King's Landing, and even like the Red Keep and all that kind of
Mm.
stuff, and the little nods towards the families that we're used to, that we know from Game of Thrones,
Yeah.
and seeing those family names, and the seat of the family name, and who's in charge of it and stuff like that. And I
Yeah.
enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. It was nice.
Yeah,
How about
I
you?
totally agree. It was nice to be back in Westeros again. You know, it's a world that I think that a lot of people got very comfortable in, and it was, it was quite painful to leave. I think, especially on the note that we left it in. So it's nice to go back to a time. I think it's really interesting to focus on one family, because we got very used to it in Game of Thrones, where flying, the opening to Game of Thrones is a map, because we're flying all over the place and we're
Mm.
seeing all of these different things, and we're flying across all of Westeros. In this series, we are focused on the Targaryens. It is called the House of the Dragon for a very good reason, and I think that we focus in on that, and I think it's really nice to sit with that family at whilst they are in power. We hear so much about this family. The shadow they cast is very long in Game of Thrones,
Yeah.
for Daenerys and things like that. So I think that this is it's a really nice thing. It's a nice time to visit. It's a nice place to visit.
Mm.
And you're so right. Looking back at these locations that we've come to know so well, after so many of them got burnt to a crisp by in the end of Game of Thrones. We should probably say spoilers for Game of Thrones, I suppose, but it's too late for that. That's it's nice to see some of these things, back at their height again, and looking at the society in a bit of in its height, I suppose you would say. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean that is almost the reason for this thing, isn't it? I mean, that's
Mm,
almost the reason that we want to see this, so we can see what it was like in this dynasty that we had very little information about
yeah,
in the original series. It was stories, and people were recalling of the sacking of King's Landing and all this kind of stuff, and it was like, okay,
mm,
right, I I I am I was excited to see how different it was. I mean, there's a question of whether it was that different at all. Considering I think it's
sure.
like a couple of 100 years difference.
Mm,
are we going to see any different,
Yeah.
technologies or whatever, like, a trebuchet instead of a catapult kind of thing? It's probably going to
Sure.
be at that level. So it was more just, I think, seeing a more prosperous, but like, as you say, a more prosperous version of the land that we know of.
Yeah.
And the stories that we are told in Thrones are that they ruled relatively successfully for a very long period of time, and to understand a little bit more about that, and for example, who they brought with them from Valeria, and it was like, oh,
Mm.
hang on a
Oh,
minute,
these guys.
there's
Yeah.
another bunch of people from Valeria. Look at that, look at them there, and it's like, okay, I understand that they're trying to dovetail us in to potentially even all the way up to you know the sacking of King's Landing with the Mad King and everything.
Yeah.
Maybe we don't know yet. I don't think they've committed to how far they're going to go with this. I think so
Mm.
far there's two or three, but I mean, they could go
Yeah.
eight. We don't know. But yeah,
That would be
the
interesting.
yeah, I think we're not going to understand that for another couple of seasons yet. I think it depends,
Mm.
one, how well it's received, and two, uh, if they know what the arc is, it's going to be 8 years or 9 years. They're going to have to start some foreshadowing in the next season, just to make them
Big
feel,
time.
make it feel like it's smart. Oh, they were
Yeah.
pulling those strings for 8 years, and But yeah, it's interesting.
Sure.
I want to see. I want to see where it goes next season. So
Mm.
that feels like a success of sorts, because I'm like, come on,
Yeah.
give me more. So they left me wanting.
100%. Like and that's all you could really want from a show like this, isn't it? Just to want more from it later on. And I think that the to just briefly touch on characters, we have some very compelling characters here, of the same kind of quality, I would say, that we had in the original series. Game of Thrones was known for to be quite a talky show, a lot of politics, a lot of intrigue, a lot of things like that going on, and I think that absolutely remains here. Like there's a lot of the characters that we see, the people that we see, and who they interact with, and how they interact with one another. I think will be familiar to the viewer who hasn't seen it yet, and to see what they recognize in that way. So I think that's really great. Um, yeah. How do you feel about the characters? Did they work for you?
Yeah, I mean, we are learning more about, for the people who haven't read the novels. We're learning more about the Targaryen dynasty than we ever did before. Um,
Hmm.
and there's the crossovers with the law and the religions and stuff like that. We can see them taking hold in the city, and it's like, oh, okay, that kind of links back to that, which I didn't understand initially.
Hmm.
And I think, that I mean, it's not a spoiler to say it because they're all over the trailer and it's in the title. There's a bucket
Yeah.
load more dragons in this thing, which is,
Oh,
I,
so many dragons.
there's an irony to that, because the people who didn't watch Game of Thrones in the first season were like, "Oh, it's all dragons and stuff," and everyone's like, "Ah, but there's no dragons in it yet." And then there's some eggs and some little dragon, and it's like that. Everyone was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, so it's not, like a fantasy." No, no, it's like a, just watch it, and everyone's like, "Oh, okay." But this has just gone all out
All
dragons
out
fantasy kind of
immediately.
thing.
Like
Like
pure
it's
fantasy early
yeah,
on.
yeah. Like these things are, they're nuclear warheads to whoever's got them. They
Yeah.
are,
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
they're sitting on the United Nations Security Council with their nukes, which are shaped like dragons, so no one's going to mess
Yeah.
with them. Which is the whole point of the
Yeah.
dynasty. It's like, okay, that's what they brought with them. They brought these tremendous weapons. Um, but yeah, I'm enjoying the characters. I'm enjoying seeing Targaryens I don't want to say in their prime, but they're being Targaryens. They're not being chased
Yeah.
or exterminated as they were in the original
Yeah.
first series. Um,
They're just
and
doing their thing. They're knocking
yeah,
around
and
being silver haired
it feels
and
like
just doing their thing.
Matt Smith was supposed to have silver hair. He was always supposed to
He
have
is silver
silver
haired.
hair.
Yeah.
Like, he looks good.
Yeah.
He looks good in his
He
wig.
does.
Yeah, he does look good in that.
He does look good in his
But
wig. I think
I've enjoyed him in
I
it.
think we're going to stray pretty shortly into some spoiler territory. So here's what we're going to do. Remember, you can catch the rest of this podcast and this conversation in audio form whenever and wherever you get your podcast. Let us know in the comments what you think of the House of Dragon, and also what you think of this new style of video. It's a little short one, and remember, you catch the rest of that over on the audio version. Brad, thank you so much for coming along. We're having a nice, a brief spoiler-free chat about the House of the Dragon, and we will see you on the next episode of the Script Department. So until then, goodbye.